Hey, how's it going? It's Lee Halliday. In this video, we're looking at React Query, which is more than just for querying. You can also mutate data as well. So querying is like pulling data from the server, GET requests in HTTP land. Mutating is typically posting or putting or patching or deleting. Basically, you're sending data to the server to change something. I'd started learning about React Query. I've done a previous video, but I'm working on a new one where basically I have this bear sighting map where you can click and you can add your bear sighting. But the problem in that video is that as soon as you refresh the screen, the bear sightings were gone because I wasn't saving them anywhere. So I'm going to do a video on that showing Prisma, Postgres, how to build a backend for this front end here. But why is this important? Because if you refresh and lose your bear sightings, you lose friends. I'm in Canada. There's bears everywhere. There's bears outside. I've lost 3 neighbors this morning, so it's very important you want to save your data. Anyways, enough with the bear sightings. We're going to be moving into the React Query land. So this is the code we're working with this morning. We're importing React Query, and we're importing from it 3 things. Use query, use this for fetching data, for pulling it. Use mutation, you're changing data in the server. And query cache, basically, this is pretty core to how React Query works in that whenever it pulls data, it stores that data in a cache so that when React re-renders, it's not lost. It's basically just going to show what's in cache rather than having to re-go back to the server every time. So why don't we get the data pulling first with React Query, just querying it. So we'll create an async function called fetch sightings. And maybe I should mention the key with mutations is that after you say add a new bear sighting, you want to show that on the map. You want to show that to the user. So in this video, we're covering 3 ways you can do that, sort of going from worst way, the slowest, to the best way. The first way is basically just refetch from the server. Second way is use the server's response to update the cache to basically show quicker the new data that was added. Third way, and the quickest and best user experience, is an optimistic UI update. So basically, server's doing its thing, but before I even get a response back from the server, I'm going to update the cache so that the user gets immediate feedback. All right, back to fetching this data. So I'm going to be using fetch, await. So we're fetching from API sightings, just like that. And then we need to get from the data that was returned, the JSON. So in this data, I've got sightings if you want to see what that looks like. I've got this endpoint here. So it's just returning an object with sightings, which is an array of basically latitude and longitude pairs. So that's the data we're pulling. So once I have the sightings, I can return that. So I've got my function. Now I need to use it with use query. So we'll be replacing this sort of hard-coded array right here. So this would be const. We'll be giving us something we will destructure some data out of. That's the right word. So use query. So I mentioned the cache. The way the cache works in React Query is all based on keys, so that you can have multiple caches and it will know which one to pull the data or update it in. So we need to give it a key, and in this case we'll give it a key of sightings, and then we can give it the function to call when it's doing the query. So fetch sightings, like that. So what do we get back? We get back some data which we'll rename to sightings. If it's status, so that will tell us if it's loading or whatnot. And we're actually not going to use that here. We will get an error just in case things didn't go as planned. So below, I already have, if there's no sightings, just return loading. So you probably want to check for a loading state versus not, but we're going to skip that in this video because it's about mutations. And why don't we also just add here, if there's an error, return error loading data, just like that. Cool. So use query. Here's the key. When React renders, because there's no entry for this key, in React Query, it will go off to the server, fetch it using this fetcher function up here, give us the data back, and we'll render them below if everything worked as planned. So let's go over to this component we're working on. So you saw it's loading for a sec, and then we get our latitude, longitude pairs back. So what I want to be doing now is when I click add, I'll sort of generate a random location, send that up to the server via the use mutation hook, and then we'll work on the 3 ways of how to display that new sighting or location back to the user. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll create a function that will basically create a sighting. So this receives a new sighting into here, and our job is basically to send this up to the server. So we will be using fetch again, and I set up an endpoint at sightings create. This is what we'll be going over in the future videos where I show how to actually build out the backend using Prisma, using Postgres, etc. But right now we're just client-side using this endpoint. Forgot a couple things. We need to tell it that we are posting data, so you use that whenever you're creating new data. Let's set some headers so that it knows the content type. So the content type is application/JSON. And the last thing we're doing is we need to send the actual data up. So we will stringify, JSON.stringify the new sighting, just like that. So I could even just rename this to sighting and get rid of this, and there we go. So what I can do here is the same thing. So I can get the new sighting out, and I think that's why I wanted to rename it new sighting so they don't have a variable conflict. So backtrack, sorry. So we'll get the sighting out of the response. So we will await for the response to convert itself to JSON, and then we can return this sighting here. So this is the function that will be called by use mutation, but we need to go use it now in our code. So let's set that up. So unlike use query, which gives you an object, use mutation, as far as I can tell, gives you an array, where the first thing in this is a function called, well, whatever you want, but we'll call it mutate. So basically we call this function anytime we want to kick off this create sighting. So we'll use, oh boy, use query, no. I'd like to pause to thank my sponsor, Yerba Mate. No, I'm not sponsored. If there is a Yerba Mate company out there that would like to sponsor me, I will gladly accept this sponsorship. Okay, back to use mutation. So the first thing we pass to this is the function that we wanted to call when we call mutate. So create sighting like this. And then we can pass a number of other things, basically callbacks to get called at different points in the life cycle. Like on success happens when this function returns successfully. But there's a few others that we're going to be looking at as well that will allow us to sort of dig into the life cycle and manipulate the cache so that the user can see the changed, the new sighting. So before we even get into that, let's call this mutate. So I've got a button here. It's got an on-click. In here, we're going to call mutate, and it will pass up whatever arguments are passed here to our create sighting function. So we're expecting to receive a new sighting, which has a latitude and a longitude. So because we're not on a map, I don't know where this sighting is. So what I'm just going to do is invent a latitude and longitude. So we'll just do math.random, and we will multiply that by, say, 100. And longitude will be math.random, and we will multiply that by -100. So that will give us our random sort of position. So we'll save that. So at this point, on click, it calls a mutate. Mutate eventually calls create sighting, passing up this new citing. So we receive that here. We post that to our backend using fetch. We send it up as JSON. So we have to stringify this object that contains the new citing info. Back from the server, we eventually should receive this citing that we can return from this asynchronous function. Let's see if it works. So I click add. I get nothing on the screen, but if I were to refresh, you can see I have 5 now. So click it again, refresh, 6. So obviously you don't want the user to have to refresh to see the new data they added. So that's what we're going to be working on right now. So the first way you can handle that, and I would say it's the easiest, but it's the worst user experience because it's the slowest feedback, is the onSuccess callback function. So this is called when the mutation has finished successfully. And what we can do here, just save it so I get some formatting. That didn't help. What we can do is we can access the query cache, so what I imported here. And there's a function you can call on that called refetch queries. And you can give it that same key, the cache key that we used right above, right here. So basically tell it, hey, go reperform the query for this cache key, just like that. So if we refresh the page now, we'll add a new one, and there we go. Add, wait 1, 2, so it's really slow, right? And the reason it's slow is because not only did it have to wait for the mutation to finish, it also had to then wait while it's going and refetching the data from the server. So there was sort of 2, and we can actually open up the network request. So 1, 2, 3 somehow. So I guess it read it once. It made the post. So this was the post here. And then it reread it with the new data here. But if we close this, you can see that I guess I don't have the fastest backend in the world because I'm going up to some database located somewhere in the clouds. 400 milliseconds for the post, then another 300 to refetch the data. So we're talking about almost 730 milliseconds, so almost a second for the user to get feedback, which is pretty bad. So we're going to improve that by, rather than telling it to refetch the queries, let's just comment that out for now. What this onSuccess actually receives is the data that was returned from this mutation function. So, and what are we returning? The new citing. So instead of telling it to refresh the queries, which will update the cache and display it to the user, what we can do instead is call a function called setQueryData. So basically this allows us to manipulate the data in the cache. So we have to give it the proper key, and then there's a function here. So this function, what it will do is it will receive the, I guess you could say the current data in the cache, like this, and we want to return a new version of that. So what we'll do is because we know we're dealing with an array of citings, we'll sort of spread out the current citings, and then we'll add the new citing. So what we are going to be receiving here is new citing, like that. So we received the new citing, which was what was returned from this function up here. And we will spread out that new, we don't even need to spread it out. Let's just put it in, new citing. Just like that. So onSuccess of the mutation, receive what was returned from this mutation function, access the cache with the correct key. To a function, we will receive the current, whatever's currently in the cache, and we want to return the new version of that. So we'll basically append the new citing. So what we did here is we basically got rid of that refetch queries so that we're only really relying on the mutation itself. So just one now. So now if I click add, it's still slow, but it's slightly better. So we go into the network tab. basically, as soon as it calls this, it doesn't do a subsequent one like before. It just uses the response and updates the cache. So we've already improved things, but we can take it a step further. So I don't want this to run, so I'm gonna rename it to X, so it's not doing anything at all. And we are going to add in 3 new lifecycle functions. The first one is onMutate, and this function receives not what's returned from the mutation function, but what was passed to the mutation function. So what was passed? It was this data right here. Oh boy, daily stand up. That means I got 10 minutes to finish this vid before work starts. We can do it, we're almost done. So mutate will receive this new citing here. We'll just call it the new data. And we need to do a few things in there. We've got another one that will be called onError. So basically what to do if this doesn't work. So this gives us information about the error. It gives us the new data, the new citing, and it gives us a function called rollback, which when there's an error, we can just simply call rollback to basically undo this optimistic UI update that we're going to be working on. The last one is onSettled, and this is basically, I think it happens after the onSuccess, basically when everything's good to go, when the promise has been resolved, I guess you could say. And what we can do here is, just to be safe, we did update the cache optimistically with data. So not data from the server, but local data. But what we can do is we can tell it, just to be safe, go and refetch the queries so that we do have whatever the backend, the source of truth, has. But the UI doesn't really rely on this because we're going to be updating the UI here in this onMutate. So the first thing we want to do is tell our query cache to cancel any ongoing queries, because that might affect yerba mate break. That might affect the cache manipulation that we're doing. The next thing that we want to do is take a snapshot of our current cache, whatever's currently in the cache for this this key. So that's const current is equal to query cache, and we're going to call a function called getQueryData for our citings key. So now that we have the current data that's in the cache, and we need this because that's essentially used down here later in the rollback if it fails, what we can do is we can update the cache. So query cache dot set query data. So we need to tell it what key we're setting the data for, like that. And then it's very similar to what we did up here, where we're basically manipulating whatever's in the cache. So we have a function and we are given sort of whatever's currently there. So let's call it the prev. I had called it current before. Let's get rid of that so that we're consistent here. Okay. So prev, and it's our job to basically return the new version of the cache. So we will spread in the prev, or I guess we could have used current as well, but we'll spread in that, and then we want to put in our new data, basically this here. So there's a problem. This data does not contain an ID that I'm relying on that typically is set on the server. It's the ID in the database. So rather than just putting in the new data like this has latitude, longitude, but it does not have an ID. So what I'm actually going to do is spread in the new data, but then add a random ID, which is sort of just temporary until the refetch queries is run, and that will be replaced by the real data. Okay, so what we want to do now is just come up with a random ID. So we'll do new date, and we'll just do 2 ISO string. That will be good enough now. And the last thing we need to do is return the current. So just to go over this, there's 4 steps. The first step in onMutate is to cancel any ongoing queries. Then we're going to dip into the cache, take that value, put it into a variable. Then we want to update whatever's in the cache. So basically take the prev cache, optimistically add in our new citing that's not yet saved in the database, and return that current cache. Just in case there's an error, it needs to be rolled back, and it'll be rolled back to our current cache. So let's go check out this UI now. Okay, so I'm going to click add, and look how fast that is. It's instantly showing up. I'm going to get rid of Slack because people are bothering me. So it's instantly showing the responses, optimistic UI. This is the best user experience. As soon as they click on that map marker, they're going to get the marker while the mutation's going on in the back end. Then we'll refetch to make sure we have the latest data from the server. But it's the best user experience. So I hope you enjoyed this little insight into React Query, both how to fetch data, which is a GET request, but also how to send data to the server, and then how to manipulate the cache to display that new data that was created via the mutation in the UI. We covered 3 ways. First way was basically just refetch all the queries. It was the slowest. Then what we did is we used the response from the mutation to update the cache. That was a little bit better because we cut out one HTTP request. And then the best way was the optimistic UI, which is basically just putting in the raw data as quick as we can prior to going to the server, but keeping track of if there's an error, we have to roll that optimistic UI back. And at the end of the day, we should probably just refetch from the server anyway so that we have the latest data with the real ID, not this random ID that I just set to have something in there. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care. Bye.